Everybody wants to give up the cheese. Cheese is like a free cheese is like a magnet.
Ты сядешь сюда, сядешь сюда. Я покажу. Все мне нравится. Ну, разберемся.
Потом мы поменяемся, кто говорит.
Микрофон давай, который говорит. А, все так, да? Махнешь когда? Я ему отдам, да.
That wasn't your fault. That's an accident waiting to happen. I didn't know we even need it. It was kind of projecting just as well on the window shades.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't here last week. I was here the week
Ну, нормально, полный зал будет.
Да, да, да. Вот мои знакомые пришли.
Так потом люди еще подходят.
Да.
Кто-то там тусуется, зашел, вышел.
Когда я
Начинаем, да? And so, let's go.
Сейчас войдут.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to see you all here today. Very important day for our House of Free Russian Peoples, our informal embassy of Assembly of former members of Russian Parliament here in DC. Today you see with us our patriarch, guru, as I say, Andrey Piontkovsky. Welcome. And for the beginning, now will be a presentation of his book, many discussion and answers of your questions. But for the beginning, let me say. He is chief. It is surprise for you. Let me speak Russian any words because my English not good for my feeling, my knowledge about Andrei Andreevich. Для меня он особенный человек, он из тех, с кем мне, молодому политику, который из Сибири избрался в парламент, еще при Ельцине пришлось.
Я буду переводить тогда, то есть, если то, что люди понимают.
Да.
Я могу
Да.
если хочешь, да я
Да.
хорошо буду переводить.
Но мы платить не будем за это.
Ну, этот случай, нет, ладно.
It's very important, my translator.
Хорошо, ладно. Говори, я стараюсь как-то передать твой просто.
Ну, переведи тогда.
Сейчас мы начнем опять. All right, so
Хорошо, я еще...
Arkady is very glad to of course, present the guru, leader of intellectual leader, in fact, of Russian liberal thought and opposition, Andrei Andreevich Piontkovsky, who is really a great source of wisdom and analysis for all of us because of his deep understanding of the processes in Russia. Anyway, go ahead. I'll take it from there. Tell me, поговори, да.
В общем, при Ельцине я вошел в политику на серьезном уровне. Это было время, когда я сотрудничал как молодой политик с такими людьми, как Юрий Николаевич Афанасьев, Глеб Якунин, Сергей Ковалев, Валерия Новодворская. Ну, наверное, таких людей не очень много, но к ним я причисляю и Андрея Андреевича, с которым несколько позже я познакомился.
Well, if I became part of a high level of politics in Russia. It was because of contact with remarkable people like Yuri Afanasyev, Valerian Novodvorskaya, uh,
Глеб Якунин.
Father Gleb Yakunin, and in this group, Arkady, of course, includes Andrey Piontkovsky.
Еще я могу добавить Витауса Ландсбергиса, с которым с 90-го года я регулярно встречался в разных качествах, и тоже это человек очень важный для истории. Витаутас Ландсбергис, это президент
Vytautas Landsbergis, I should include also Vytautas Landsbergis, with whom I also met during those years in the 90s, who also had, of course, tremendous political contribution.
It's our history of USSR and Free Russia. И вот здесь был не так давно Лех Валенса.
And we had here not long ago Lech Walesa.
Ну, в общем, не буду долго эту мысль продолжать, но сейчас уже мне приходится общаться с молодым поколением и журналистов, и студентов, и политиков.
I won't continue for a long time, but now I'm meeting with a younger generation of journalists and politicians.
Буквально на прошлой неделе я дал 3 интервью для Литвы, для в Германии людей молодых, которые пишут диссертации по истории вот того периода.
Not long ago, I gave an interview for a group of young people from Germany and Lithuania who are trying to write the history of that period.
И один из них сказал: вы счастливец, вы занимались любимым делом в окружении таких звезд, исторических людей.
And he said, you're really a lucky person because you were able to engage in work and in your favorite activity in the presence of absolutely remarkable people.
Так вот, может быть, многие из вас будут вспоминать время, этот день, когда вы будете общаться
Many
сегодня
of
с
you here
Пионковским.
will remember this day when you had the opportunity to meet Andrei Piontkovsky, because he certainly is part of that era, and so you're also lucky.
That's all. Thank you very much, David.
So, all right. Okay.
Я передаю слово.
Okay.
Okay, let me set up the mic. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. Finally, we are here with this book, The Rise and Fall of Putinism and the Stakes of the Global War. It took a year for this book to be published, and there were some challenges. We'll talk about it. But first of all, let me introduce our team. My name is Anton. I'm George Washington University political science student and founder of DC for Democratic Russia. Jason is a translator and editor, and of course Andrey Piontkovsky. Many of you already knew him, but if you don't, he is a third generation of Russian intelligentsia. He's trained mathematician, analyst, and in 1990s he shifted from his scientific career into publishing. He started writing about the regime, and he was one of the first people who wrote about Putin 4 months since he became a president. Andrei already saw where it was leading. And Andrei publishing at the Kyiv Post. You can find his articles there, as well as he's running the YouTube channel where he has over 200,000 followers, and he's going online every single week. So you can just go to YouTube and find his excellent speeches and his excellent perspective on what's happening in the region and in Russia particularly. With that, I'll transition to the book, tell you more about it. And well, first of all, this is not a conventional political book. It's a chronological collection of essays written starting 1999 up to the present moment. A quarter century of warnings about the regime that would eventually launch the largest war in Europe since 1945, the Second World War. What makes it remarkable is that you can watch Piontkovsky identify the logic of the system in real time, from the Chechen War to Crimea, the full-scale invasion, and the West struggle to define victory. Why does it matter now, you may ask this question. I'll tell you why. Because the war is still not over. Because Putin is still in power. Because many of the mechanisms he described long ago, nuclear blackmail, red line manipulation, and Western self-deterrence, are still shaping policy today. And my perspective, I was born when Putin was the president. He's still the president. That's terrible, guys. This is one of the earliest printed uses of the term Putinism. Andrei invented this term. The key essay, Putinism at the highest and final stage of bandit capitalism in Russia, was published on January 11, 2000, when Putin had only just come to power. At the moment when many still saw Putin as a bureaucratic placeholder, Piontkovsky already saw something much, much darker. So what is Putinism? Not just an authoritarianism. It's a system in which state power is captured by the security services for, of course, personal enrichment. Oligarchs either serve the Kremlin or are destroyed. Propaganda replaces law, and war becomes necessary because the system needs enemies. That logic is laid out explicitly in Piontkovsky January 2000 essay that I showed you previously. People thought this was an exaggeration. In retrospect, it was a diagnosis. It all started in 1999. After the apartment bombings, the state blamed Chechens, launched the Second Chechen War, and transformed fear into political legitimacy. In the earliest essays in this volume, Piontkovsky was already asking whether terror, propaganda, and war were being fused into a single political technology. Then came the Kursk disaster. The pattern was already visible. Refusal of responsibility, contempt for human life, and immediate recourse to deflection and externalization. In the Nordost-Ossetia siege, the regime again chose force over life. Chechen terrorists seized the Moscow theater. Negotiations began. Aslan Maskhadov, the elected Chechen president in exile, offered to mediate. Well, of course, Kremlin refused because they didn't want his rating to skyrocket. Instead, they pumped poison gas into the theater. At least 130 hostages died, not from bullets, but from their own government's rescue. Piontkovsky wrote at the time, the regime chose spectacle over lives because saving hostages through negotiation would have legitimized Maskhadov and weakened the war narrative. 2004. In September 2004, on the traditional first day of school in Russia, terrorists took over 1,100 hostages in school in Beslan, North Ossetia, most of them children. Again, Maskhadov offered to negotiate. Again, the Kremlin refused. The assault killed 334 hostages, including 186 children. Piontkovsky's question remains unanswered. Why did the regime consistently reject paths that might save lives? His answer, because Putinism requires enemies, spectacles of strength, and the message that negotiation is weakness. 2014 Crimea. For 14 years, Putinism consumed Russia from within. In 2014, it turned outward. Piontkovsky immediately recognized Crimea as the opening of a larger imperial phase. In the preface, Leonid Nevsky, in the book, recalls that Piontkovsky accurately described the ideological shift that followed Russia's seizure of Crimea and foresaw where it was heading. And of course, 2022 is a full-scale invasion. We call it simple war that Russia launched against Ukraine. The system Piontkovsky had been describing since 1999, repression, propaganda, kleptocracy, hatred, and war, had now expanded into a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The later essays in the book keep returning to one central question. Will the West define victory or merely manage decline? And with that, I'm very happy to turn things over to Jason to talk about the art of translation, as it wasn't an easy task, so Jason will inform you better on it. Change the slide.
Oh, that's me. Thank you, thank you. Should I sit here? Okay. Well, it was a real pleasure. Hello, everyone. To work with Andrei Andreevich and Anton, who joined us a bit later. This project started about 2 years ago, I guess I would say, to translate select articles from these two tomes here, from Russian into English. So a little bit about me. I also went to GW, like Anton, but a long time before you. And, and then got my graduate degree in Russian from Columbia. And I started to teach DLI, Defense Language Institute, in Monterey, and then in DC, where I taught Russian to English translation for military officers in the Pentagon. Lots of material on uh, economics, military, and lots of things that helped me with this translation, absolutely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something more specific, I guess, the actual translation of this of this book. I see that we have several, probably professional, maybe even translators or interpreters here. So perhaps you will help me with some of my difficulties that I am going to express. But maybe some of you aren't so familiar with Russian culture and the Russian style of writing, and maybe my remarks will be more directed at you. As Anton mentioned, Andrei Andreevich is a member of the Russian intelligentsia, a long line of members. And so, although he was trained as a mathematician, when he started to write about politics, uh, it was, of course, completely usual and ordinary for him to make references, as members of the Russian intelligentsia do to all sorts of Greek myths, ancient literature, um, poetry, what have you. And of course, all of that is in this, all right? Tuchev, Chadaev, everything you can imagine. And it was difficult for me. How am I going to translate this? Poetry or a reference to a film, perhaps, or a Greek myth into English. Most often, perhaps sometimes there was a translation already available, or you just footnoted it, right? I'm sure you're all familiar with that method. The Scythians are in there, the Skifli, Van Wiesen, Bloch, Akhmatova, Nabokov. I just don't picture, I would say you are a publicist, Andrei Andreevich, right? Perhaps this is a political writer, editorial writer, but would Maureen Dowd or someone in the American tradition at the New York Times or David Brooks be making these kind of references? I doubt it. That's my opinion, I guess. That's what made it especially challenging. And if you're familiar with Vladimir Nabokov's theory or thoughts on translation, he translated Yevgeny Onegin into English completely literally. No rhyme. He thought that was impossible. Don't even try to do it. So what his translation is tons and tons of references, and just the content is related. And sometimes that's exactly what had to happen with some of your articles and some of your references, and mostly the titles of the articles, I would say, which are always full of plays on words, for sure. Nabokov was a complete master at this. He has an article, or no, he has a short story called Usta Kustam in Russian. How do you translate this? Mouth to bushes? I don't know. But he translated it into English, and he probably chose the name of this short story on purpose because he knew how to translate it into English, which is lip to lip. Get it? I could never aspire to that kind of mastery of translation. What we try to do was something called congruity judgment, which is to translate if it's an idiom, don't translate it word for word, but the meaning of it is at least conveyed. I had trouble with the word silavik. Perhaps you know this term, silavые структуры, or how do you translate that? We don't have an equivalent in English. I don't think we do. Some people say it's the people with the guns, right, in the government. It's the military and paramilitary and law enforcement agencies in Russia. So how do you convey that? That's a very long sentence in English. Just transliterate it. I would write silavik in English, in Latin letters, and then explain what it is. I wanted to also mention the role of language as it pertains to this conflict or the war. And I'm already like kind of coloring my description of what's going on in Ukraine. But for those of you who don't know Russian, to say na Ukrainia versus v Ukrainia already tells you what side you're on in this conflict. Yes. And so if you don't know the language, this is an immediate indicator of where you're coming from about what's going on. The Russian propaganda media will say na Ukrainia, which roughly translates to on Ukraine, and v Ukrainia is
But Jason, it's a great translation if you say the Ukraine.
Yes, yes, yes. There is a parallel in English, yes. Ukraine versus the Ukraine, but I would argue that if you say the Ukraine, you will be more aligned with Russia, right? But I would argue that the Ukraine was already obsolete before this war started. It would be kind of I think, the equivalent of calling Thailand Siam, really. Do you know many people who say the Ukraine nowadays?
It still happens.
It does happen, separate from how you view the conflict.
Even literature in the State Department.
Really?
It happens.
I've done that.
So you grew up thinking that, right? That is the equivalent. The equivalent is using the definitive article.
What is the
Sorry, the definite article.
What's the significance?
Now Ukraine means like on the edge kind of the Russian Empire. So it means like
The Ukraine is a region.
yeah,
Ukraine is a nation.
correct.
Okay.
So when you use the, it means in this country that is independent of Russia. Na means part of, like saying the South of the US, right?
Right.
I also wanted to talk about the formality and informality of the languages, perhaps where Russian has, many of you know this, of course, but the formal and the informal address, вы and ты, which we don't have in English. And so Andrei Andreevich refers to, in many articles, President Biden as Dedushka Biden, which is Grandpa Biden, right? Dedushka is grandfather. And so I translated it as grandpa, but you meant it, of course, pejoratively. And I don't think grandpa really does it. I think grandpa, okay, maybe it's not a compliment, but I think it's actually it's kind of like Uncle Sam, which is not pejorative. I think that Grandpa Biden might be actually kind of cute. It doesn't really, maybe Gramps would have been better. I don't know. But Dedushka Biden was a challenge, let's say. And also, just in general, like when Russian politicians, you all have heard of machit v sartiria, that Putin said in Russian, which is to wipe out in the outhouse, is a famous saying that he did. And I don't think that the translation of that, smoke them out of the outhouse, is as offensive as it sounded in Russian, because this was coming from the president. And yes, Cheney and other presidents, and Trump, of course, have cursed. Yes, they have used vulgar language. But Russian speakers, please agree. How shocking was it to hear zamachit v sartiria from a sitting president? Smoke them out of the outhouse. What I'm saying is, it's difficult to convey sometimes the shocking, perhaps profanity of certain terms in Russian into English. What else did I want to say? Russian sentence length versus English sentence length. I think you probably can guess which is longer. So it took some time to chop your sentences down a bit to make them palatable, even for someone who doesn't have ADHD. Not me, but I think I don't know. Is English native speakers perhaps cannot stomach the long sentences that Russians are used to.
We call it Proustian.
Okay. What Hemingway is perhaps
Dostoevsky style.
Dostoevsky style can't be. It just can't be digested, I suppose. And also the play on words that you and others have so wonderfully expressed. Um, there was one of your titles is "Все встают, чтобы не сесть." How am I going to try to express this? Everyone stands up and applauds, so that they don't sit. But in Russian, to sit, it automatically means what? In jail. So it means sent to jail. And I just had to, there was no way I could convey that without adding the jail part to it. And also neologisms like putler, it's a common expression or phrase, it's word in English or Russian. Putler, combination of Putin and Hitler. It's very common. It's used in your books. I just translated it as putler. But again, I am not convinced that it conveys the same emotional connotation that it does in Russian. I think in English it sounds kind of funny and not effective. But you do what you can do, right? And I think that's it. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is I wanted to put in a word about my favorite article in this book, which is not really linked with Putin or the war in Ukraine. It has to do with John F. Kennedy, actually, and Oswald, and your thoughts on that assassination, and Marina Prusakova Oswald Porter, who is still alive, by the way, living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And the name of the book, the article is Zvon Kolokolov in Russian and The Tolling of the Bells in English in this. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. I would like to turn over the microphone to you, the person who made it all happen, Andrei
Well, I already
Andreevich.
have microphone, yes.
You have a microphone, yes.
Well, this work was planned as academic undertaking, just to translate the best of these hundreds of my articles for latest 30 years. But it turned out to be a real political fight, because half of this article in this book were written during our operation. We published them in about 40 articles published last year in Kiev Post, English language, Ukrainian newspaper. So it was not just translation, it was fighting, participation in this war, fighting on the side of Ukraine. Before answering your questions, I tell a couple of things of my vision of these events of last year's time. The term which I used widely in my book is the fourth World War. And it used not only by myself, but several other analysts use it. For me, it's a sequence of these world events. The Second World War was initiated by Hitler as a revenge for defeat in the First World War. The Third World War was Cold War between basically the Soviet Union and the United States. And the First World War, Четвертая мировая война, was unleashed by Putin at his desire to revenge for defeat of the Soviet Union in the Third World War. This concept make this comparison of Hitler and Putin more convincing and more deeply persuaded. This war was unleashed by Putin, but it was World War. He is not the only instigator. This First World War was enterprise of several authoritarian regimes of so-called axis of evil: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea also participant in this list. I think in much extent their desire to crush the so-called free world was embodied among leaders of this neo-fascist regime by catastrophe of American withdrawal from Afghanistan. This TV show was emotionally so appealing to their feeling of possibility of revenge or weakened West. And the response of West, of so-called free world, was proved to be terribly inadequate. Terribly inadequate. Let's remember several years between Crimea occupation and full-scale Russian assault on Ukraine. It was evident that Russia is preparing for full-scale war. And what was the reaction of the West? Almost every day, either President Biden, Grandpa Biden, or NATO General Secretary Stolberg repeated the same phrase. We shall fight for every inch of Article 4 territory. They remind world that they will fulfill their obligation according to NATO alliance. But it was evident to everybody, and first of all to Putin, it is a kind of invitation for his aggression in Ukraine, that emphasizing, I was crazy each time listening to this phrase, we shall fight for every inch covered by Article 5. And what about inch not covered by Article 5? And you remember the first reaction of the United States, suggestion to Zelensky to flee from Ukraine. And what going on in the world, the latest 4 years, to my view, is I describe it as the birth of new great European nation, the birth of Ukraine. Because Ukraine proved to be the only one nation who stand up to this aggression, which was directed not only against it. You remember the so-called note sent by Russian foreign minister to all leaders of NATO countries in November 1921. It was fantastically insolent. They demanded them to get out from Eastern Europe, and interesting, they demanded West to retreat to line, a specific line between Adriatic and Baltic seas. It's interesting that its line, the same line, its line of maximum advance to the west of Juche, of Chinggis Khan Orda, and twice.
I didn't know how to translate that. I'll tell you.
Sorry?
Было трудно перевести. Эту линию.
Twice in the history, Juche, it's one of the part of Chinggis Khan Orda, advanced so far to the west. One time, first in 2045. Khan Bati, after conquering Kiev Rus, moved further and was stopped there. Or rather, he decided to get back when he got news about Chinggis Khan's death and decided to take part in transition of power in Orda. An interesting historical coincidence that to the same line, another Khan of Juche, Joseph Stalin, moved to the same line in exactly 700 years, in 2045. This almost mystical coincidence. And for the third time, leaders of Moscow demanded West to retreat to the same classical line. And well, if President Zelensky took advice of Grandpa Biden, left Ukraine, and Russia overtake Ukraine, they planned to take Kiev in 3 days. There was no force which was ready to stop this order. It was heroic resistance of Ukrainian people which holds this order for 5 years on the same line of today confrontation. It's interesting that importance of this war of Ukraine was first appreciated in the West, a person from whom I expected it less of than anybody else. Henry Kissinger, in June 19, in June 2022. Oh, very, very unexpected for him, especially article. He said, well, we're now talking about NATO, about Ukraine, whether NATO is able to have right, or have qualities to join NATO, to whether Ukraine can join NATO. But look, now Ukraine is the only country which fulfilling the duty for which NATO was created. It's the only country which defends us of movement of Russian forces. It was evident. I wrote about it in several articles before Kissinger. But to Kissinger, to say this phrase was intellectual heroic act, because Kissinger was a classical, was a leader on so-called reality school. For 20 years, he repeated 1,000 times that NATO should not be moved to the east, that Ukraine never should become member of NATO. They should not provoke Russia and so on. And he was 100 years in 2022, and in this age, in 100 years, he makes such intellectual outbreak and change completely his concept. And my former friend, Tom Graham, you know him better, of course. He was assistant of Kissinger in Kissinger Association, and actually he wrote for Kissinger all the articles about Russia. And I tell bluntly that Tom Graham became a paid Russian agent, and Kissinger sacked him. It's a lot may be said about, of course, President Trump. Maybe I'm sure you ask a question, but I want to say now about positive role of President Trump and his MAGA philosophy. On the last year Munich Conference on Security, they shocked, Hexit and Defense shocked Europe by open statement that United States actually don't intend to fulfill the obligation on NATO alliance, and that their security concern are Latin America, maybe China, but certainly not Europe, and Europe should be regard its security as its own concern. It was, of course, a shock for Europe. Europe, European for decades, waged discussion about creating a European army. They asked themselves, what if someday a gentleman will appear in White House who will not be faithful to the obligation of NATO on NATO. And this gentleman appeared, and no European army. they misused our opportunities. But after initial shock, they discovered that European armies exist, and it's Ukrainian army. And now all European security policy goes from this understanding that Ukrainian army is the only European army. Some European analysts are talking about possible war with Russia in 1929 or 31, but 29, if Ukrainian army will fall, there will be no 29 or 31 for you. And this understanding strengthens European European determination, already not to help Ukraine army, not just act of mercy, act of solidarity with fighting nation. It's an act of self-defense, the only way of self-defense, because the only barrier between Europe and the Russian Orda, who seeks to reach this line for the third time in history. By the way, the Churchill mentions the same line in his famous Fulton speech. And whatever Trump intentions or betrays, I now believe and know that Ukraine will win this war, because Europe understands that it's their fight, and the most tragic moment in this war was a year ago, March 25, when Trump humiliated Zelensky in White House. You have no cards, he said, and ordered to stop intelligence information and he stopped selling of arms. But it's interesting then it turns out later that intelligence information was not stopped. The CIA director Witkoff, he did not fulfill this order of Trump, and in 2 weeks Trump changed his mind also. And as for eight for munition supply, the General Secretary Mark Rutte conducted a general Grand Pas operation by using grid and
Хотите на вопросы отвечать? Вопросы?
No, grid and тщеславие Trump.
Vanity. Vanity.
Vanity, другое слово яркое очень есть.
Эготизм.
Right.
Vanity, with his fanfare, he managed stable supply of ammunition to Ukraine by paying European, and Trump was bound to agree. So now this European army is strengthening itself. And what's interesting, European military-industrial complex is created. Dozens of factories are working now in Europe, in Germany, in France, in Great Britain, on military production, on Ukrainian design, and even in the United States, to company.
And they're being sent to the Middle East now.
And now Ukraine
These experts.
is proved to be useful in Middle East also. It's interesting that Ukrainian experts are demanded by all Gulf states and by Americans, in spite of resistance and initial refusal of Trump to invite Ukrainian anti-drone technology. He was bound to agree. So it occurred that Ukraine has a lot of cards. So this is the main results, main world events of us for yes. It's, I repeat it, my definition is the birth of new great European power. Like the similar process is going on in the Middle East, where Israel is becoming a crucial Middle East great power. Well, this new dramatic world events, we try to present, to expose, to discuss in our book.
Now questions, perhaps? Oh, yeah. Yes.
Andrei, thank you very much for coming, and for us it's extremely important, and it's a great honor for you to be here. I want to elaborate more on what you were saying about the horde, Harda, and what Mr. Kissinger has said. I remember myself being a young kid at school. We have been taught that it was Kiev and Rus which saved Europe from hordes invasion. That we stopped the Genghis Khan, and because of us, the European civilization was saved. Now, living in Ukraine, I hear a lot a sentiment that we Ukrainians, as Kiev and Rus, we took the fight, while those bloody Muscovites, they made a deal with the horde, and that's why they survived while we were destroyed, and now we became victims to this policy, and we became the slaves to the Russian Empire because we took the fight and they did not. And I'm kind of thinking about a modern day situation when Ukrainians are taking the fight. They are fighting against the horde. I'm part of this. And some people, especially, those from the north, Koch, Latynina, other reasonable people, they are saying, why should Ukrainians fight? Let's make a deal, because if they don't make a deal, then Ukraine would not survive. What do you think? Shall we fight or shall we make a deal? Thank you.
First about historical reference. There were no Russia and no Ukraine in 13th century. There were Kiev Rus, and Kiev Rus was crushed by Orda, but historically it happens that northern part of Kiev Rus for 2 centuries stayed in this part of Orda. And the southern part of Kiev Rus was, during these 2 centuries, was part of Великое княжество Litovskое. And there was very different historic experience. And I would say that it's interesting if we talk about events of, we want to talk about events of 13th century. May I remind you about interesting event. Almost simultaneously, historically simultaneously, 2 great political texts in history of mankind appeared in this century. I don't remember the exact date. One, it seems, in 1205 year, and another 1212 year. One of these is Chinggis Khan Yassa, and different, and second one is Magna Charta, archivoist. These are absolutely contradicting conception of politics, of relation between person and state. And actually, today, the first, what this war which I called is First World War, is fighting between this concept, between Yassa concept and between Magna Charta concept. And about now, well, Koch and their opinion, they call Ukraine to capitulate. Well, why Ukraine should follow listen to the advice? Much more, I'm more worried by the same advice of a very distinguished person, one of the most respected historian, Mark Savonin. Mark Savonin is a great man. He, together with Suvorov, they created a new concept of history of Second World War. This is a great man, but unfortunately he, in his many publications, support the same idea that Ukrainians should agree on Putin's scenario of waging the war. Well, Mark Savonin is a great man, and he has right of any wrong judgment. And Koch has Latinian elements of Putin's propaganda. But thank you for attracting our attention to this choice. This choice is very indicative of the state of the war. What is the difference in so-called peace negotiation between Kiev position and Moscow position? By the way, Kiev position is initial Trump position. Trump initially, almost a year ago already, suggested just ceasefire on the actual line of confrontation. And Ukraine agreed on this. But Putin insisted on other line. He demanded that Ukraine gave him without fight 20% of Donetsk area, and it's not just 20%. It's most forbidden defensive installation. It's classical repetition of Hitler taking Sudets. Interesting, when Hitler, after this München deal, entered the Sudet, he claimed that it would take him a year to take these defenses by force. So, and this is what Latinin, Koch, and unfortunately Mark Savonin advise Ukrainian to leave this area. They never agree because, well, 80% or 85% of their population against. The second, they never do it, and it's from very purely military point of view. It's very unreasonable. But let's talk on this situation strategically. It's the fact that Putin demands this scenario prove out that he already lost the war, because the aim of the war was elimination of Ukrainian state, and then only after elimination of Ukrainian state he could move to this Batyi-Djugashvili line in the west. And he realized that he will never do it. So now he just wants to get this 20% of Donetsk area to sell out Russian population his defeat, to declare it as a victory. It's not the argument for Koch and Latinin scenario. I never suppose it, but it's proof that Putin was the war. It's proof number one, and now I make proof number two. I think that many of you follow Russian propaganda. The most prestigious Kremlin propaganda platform is the so-called uh, grand game show by Russian spy Dmitry Simis. For 10 years he played the role of real politician in the United States, being just a Russian KGB agent. And last week he had made interview with one very important Russian elite personnel, Mr. Zatulin. I think many of you heard his name. By the way, we wrote article about this Zatulin in the Siemens talk in Kiev Post. Zatulin is the Russian Ukraine folk #1. He demanded war against Ukraine for whenever, never Putin thought about it, from 90s. And he enthusiastically support outbreak of the war. And even before, after Crimea annexation, he participated in these separations, separatist fighting in Donetsk, Lugansk, and so on. So he absolute anti-Ukraine politician. And interesting discussion between them was happened several days ago, again, for second time running. Science asked him, how do you think, is it possible in some feasible period of time to us to attain the objectives which we proclaimed at the beginning of special war operation? And Zatulin very quietly answered, objectively speaking, some of the objectives declared by our president, he said, at the beginning of conflict is difficult to achieve, or rather to say they are unattainable. Well, the very simple question, why Zatulin and Simis were not arrested on the second day about these revelations, and they repeated the exchange of views. My explanation is very simple, because first they express the common opinion of all political elite, Russian political elite, and their interview was approved and prepared. Putin is dictator, but he is not dictator of Stalin 1937. Well, he may kill Zatulin, for example, if he will, but he can't kill all the nomenclature like Stalin was killed in 1937. And I think that even Putin already knows that it will be necessary to agree that this purpose are unattainable. I think that after decisive result of Iranian war, and I'm sure that it will be decisive. It provoke it will be such more blow for Putin's bunker that they agree the next step on this peace talk will be agreeing on ceasefire, on actual confrontation line. But I am not sure whether Ukrainians will agree on this, because initiative are slowly going to them. This war is now is a classical war of attrition, and mostly psychological and political attrition. This war will be decided not in fighting for some Malinovka or Shepetovka. It will be decided in capitals, either in Kiev or in Moscow. And I think in Kiev now is much more firm and united. And these events, which I shared with you, show that Moscow is ready to crumble.
Any other questions?
Great. Check, check. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Okay.
It works.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate your discussion. My name is David. It appears to me that the major leaders might not be getting very good information. My impression is that Putin has sort of surrounded himself with yes men that are telling him what he wants to hear. And media reports suggest that the same is happening with the United States president. I heard people were, his advisors were citing polls that show 90% support for attacking Iran, for instance, when that seems really outlandish. So my question is, how does one achieve a lasting just peace when it seems like that the major leaders are getting very bad information, and selectively it seems like they are kind of selecting their own information to get what they want to hear? How do we achieve a lasting and just peace in that situation?
Yeah, слушаю.
Как можно добиться настоящего мира, когда лидеры не получают правильную настоящую информацию, реальную информацию?
Whose leaders do you mean? Trump will very extraordinary person. I think he not interested in information. He creates his own mythology. But I already said one positive thing about Trump, that his abrupt refusal to fulfill NATO obligation will help Europe to understand that what is its real European army. But I think another advantage for us of Trump that he may be handled by very clever people.
In which country?
I know three very positive handle. One, the brightest of them is Prime Minister Netanyahu, he attacked him completely on the side, on the right side of history in, in, in Middle East. The second one, I already mentioned also, this Mark Rutte, General Secretary of NATO. Mark Rutte, safe mechanism of supplying Ukraine with modern American weapons. And the third, maybe more important person, is Marco Rubio, Foreign Secretary, because Trump, or instinct of Trump, are anti-Ukrainian and pro-Putin. I don't want to indulge in the discussion why is he so manipulated by Putin. He's manipulated very not so successful because after Putin manipulation, immediately working another side. So foreign policy of the United States is a result of Trump, anti-Putin, anti-Ukrainian intentions, and pro-Ukrainian line of majority of American public, majority of American Congress, and considerable part of Trump cabinet. Were certainly Rubio, Bessent, finance minister, CI director, and others. So this before our eyes, yesterday and today, we saw this fighting for Trump between different persons. And 2 days ago, Trump made a terrible thing. He called Putin, knowing that Putin has provided intelligence information to Iranians, what helps to kill American soldiers. And he asked Putin actually to help him to chicken out, to get out from this situation. For what purpose he called Putin? 2 days ago he felt that he got in unpleasant state. It's necessary to declare the victory and finish all actions in Iran. But today he's already in absolutely different mood. He already declared that, well, I know firmly that Putin provides information by to Iranians, and I don't like it. And especially his war minister today declared very strong strikes, prolonged strikes on what left from Iranian war machine. So Trump, I think our handles for good are working efficiently with this moral and mental idiot.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you.
Yeah,
So you have a chance to purchase the book right now, get it signed by the author, and then